Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Derek Rowland. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and Director of Communications to the Honourable Lisa MacLeod, Ontario's Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries. I have the pleasure of being your moderator for this afternoon's 12th regional webinar outlining the government's supports for heritage, sport, tourism and culture industries sectors in light of COVID-19. We're coming to you live here from at least Toronto, but certainly speaking to everyone in the Hamilton, Halton and Brant area this afternoon. Before we get started with this afternoon's presentation, I'm first going to throw it over to your local MPP, Stephen Crawford, for some introductory remarks before going to the Minister. MPP Crawford, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. And I wanted to say hello to everyone and thank you for participating in today's call. And I'd also like to thank Minister MacLeod and your team for organizing today's call. I know you've had tremendous success at bringing people out and reaching them across the province so people can be more familiar with a lot of the programs that our government's put in place. And I want to thank all the sports organizations, the cultural organizations, nonprofits, and businesses for your perseverance in going through this most difficult time. Obviously, this has been both very difficult on a personal level and a business level for everyone across the province, in fact, quite frankly, around the world. So your perseverance is really appreciated. Having said that, we do have a lot of programs that we want to highlight today, and I'm glad that Mr. MacLeod is brought this about so we're able to share some of the knowledge and how you can access some of these programs. We've done a lot in terms of supporting businesses, cultural organizations, whether it's the Main Street program and helping businesses adapt to the web, or PPE programs, government grant programs, rent subsidies. There's been a number of different areas that we've been able to help businesses out, and we'll go through some of the details today. Having said that, I did want to sort of end before I pass it back to Minister MacLeod with the fact that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Premier Ford yesterday announced that we will be moving into a zone-colored strategy effective next week. So we hope that we can all get through this most difficult time and really get through this. One story I would certainly highlight is going back in history. If you look at the Spanish flu in 1919, it was far worse than what we're going through with 50 million people that died. A very difficult time for society. Having said that, the 1920s was the biggest period in economic growth in the history of the world. And I'm very confident that Ontario, and in fact globally, we will come out of this very, very strong. We've got some of these programs to at least be a Band-Aid to help get through. I hope you can find this webinar useful. And again, thank you for participating in today's program.
Thank you very much, MPP Crawford. Maybe quickly before we go to the Minister, I do see we've got another MPP Donna Skelly from the Hamilton area joining us. MPP Skelly, if you'd like to provide maybe some introductory remarks before going to the Minister.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. And a special thank you to the Minister, who is incredible. She's been hosting a number of these seminars throughout the past year, as we've all struggled to get through COVID-19. But they are really an example of what we collectively can do. And what you share with us today and have shared with us over the past few months have been taken into consideration. I know that we've had a number of pre-budget deliberations, for example, and a lot of the comments and a lot of the suggestions that have been put forward by members of every sector are being considered by our ministers as we prepare our budget. But today we're here to again talk to all of you and to listen to you and to listen to our minister to provide us some guidance so that we can collectively navigate this horrible pandemic. But we have your ear, we have your back. And the minister, again, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and your vision to allow us to come out on the other side of COVID-19, not only to get through it, but to survive and to thrive once this is all over. Thank you again, all of you. I will hand it back over to the minister.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna and Stephen, for joining us and for being here today. I want to say thanks as well to the over 150 people who have joined us from of all of our sectors in heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries. Your region is very important to this province, whether it's Hamilton and the hopefully 2021 Grey Cup, Oakville and your gorgeous waterfront, and Burlington, of course, a beautiful community that houses our Royal Botanical Gardens. And so we want to make sure that we continue to support you as we deal with our economic and our social recovery. And so that's what this is about today. I wanted to talk a little bit, or through my ministry officials, a little bit about the easing of restrictions as we transition from a province-wide lockdown and stay-at-home order back into the color-coded zones, so that you understand what those restrictions, the easing of restrictions, will mean for each one of our sectors. I want to talk a little bit about the Ontario Arts Council increase to their budget by $25 million, $24 million going to core cultural institutions across the province, with $1 million reserved to support individual artists, and the $105 million over the next 2 years increase to the Ontario Trillium Foundation, so that we can get back to community building across the great province of Ontario and support our not-for-profit sector, our tourism industry, our cultural industries, as well as our heritage and museums across the great province. We will be flowing very shortly an extra $302 million through the ministry. That would include, of course, the new Ontario travel incentive that we hope will be able to employ in the early part of the summer, in order, if it's safe to do so. We'll walk you through, we'll toss it over to the Ministry of Finance, and they'll walk through the one-time PPE grant of $1,000 to the Main Street program. They'll talk also about the one-time small business grant up to $20,000, and they'll discuss the energy and property tax bill rebates and relief. And finally, we will have the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services jump on to do a demonstration of how you actually access the portal. At any time throughout this session, should you have a question, please note that there is a chat box at the bottom for Q&As. In addition, you're more than welcome at any time to email me at minister.mcleod@ontario.ca. My team is working very hard to try and get responses to our sectors as quickly as possible. And if it does require a response from another ministry, we'll endeavor to get that response to you as quickly as possible as well. So with that, thank you very much again. I do hope you get a lot out of this session, and that we'll be able to help you access much needed government supports during this COVID-19 period. So with that, Derek, I want to say thanks again to everyone for joining me, including my colleagues from the legislature. We're actually in a caucus meeting as we speak, so they popped back off. But I'll pass it over to you again, Derek, so we can begin the demonstration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you also to the other MPPs who were able to join us here this afternoon. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that there is the QA bar below. If you do have a question, we'll try our best to get to you as quickly as we can, but if not, we may ask you to contact us directly by emailing your question to minister.mcleod@ontario.ca. To begin, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Harlow, who is an Assistant Deputy Minister for Sport within our ministry, as well as Tony Marzato, who's with our Tourism Division, to walk through some of the specifics around the government's announcement yesterday as we begin to come out of lockdown that's currently in place province-wide until at least February 16th for most public health regions, certainly the ones in the Hamilton, Halton, Brant area, or February 22nd for the designated 3 Toronto, Peel, and York. This is important to understand as we get back to normal, but also to understand if the lockdown did impact your business, that also contributes to some of the eligibility requirements in the small business support grant program that the Ministry of Finance will be walking us through following this presentation. But with that, why don't I turn it over to you, Steve, to kick us off on the current reopening measures that are coming into effect. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Derek. And if we can go to the next first slide, just to summarize. I think it's important to note so that we are returning to the COVID response framework, keeping Ontario safe and open. And so basically that means we're going back to the color-coded system system that was in place earlier this year. So effective February 10th, those public health units that have the indicators to put them into the green prevent zone, and those are listed right there, are going back in the green zone, and they'll be able to have their businesses and their operations and their programs operate under the restrictions that are permitted in the green zone. As Derek and the minister mentioned, there's an extended province-wide shutdown in the stay-at-home order that applies for an additional week in all other PHU public health units except for PO Toronto in York, and those will be extended to February 22nd. So once those regions come out and back into the framework, it'll depend upon what the public health indicators identify for each of those public health units, and they will be classified into one of the green, yellow, orange, red, or gray categories that they'll be in effective those dates. And as the framework is being reinstated, there'll be updates for our sector. So maybe the next slide. Of significance, I would note that a change that was made in the reopening framework is ski hills will now be able to open in all zones, with the exception of the shutdown zone, obviously, and for recreational activities, recreational downhill skiing. Any person using a ski lift must wear a mask or a face covering, unless they're entitled to an exceptions, and I'll get the exceptions in a second. And if they're using from the same household, that's fine. Ski and outdoor amenities must comply with general capacity limits for businesses or facilities. In terms of rentals, they can be rented, but they must be cleaned and disinfected as frequently as is necessary to maintain a sanitary condition. And we do know that the ski hill operators, they had a working group. They did a lot of work to demonstrate how they can operate safely, how they can rent equipment, and how they can manage activities. In terms of lessons as it relates to ski hills, they may be offered in the green, yellow, orange, and red with conditions. And set out there are the number of students that can be in a given class or a lesson, so long as they can maintain a physical distance of 2 meters. Competitions is not permitted at this time for those activities. The use of coverings while lining up on ski lifts. So this is important because it enables the ski lifts to increase capacity and occupancy. So if you're entering a ski hill, you must maintain a distance. But if you're using a ski lift, there's a surface lift, that's okay. If you're using a ski lift chair, there must be one empty seat between persons who are not members of a single household. So if you're all from the same household, you can all sit in the 4 or the 6 person ski lift. If there's different households, there needs to be a space between, and there needs to be a face covering. Obviously, para-athletes and their attendants or guests it can exempt. And then, we recognize that maintaining 2 meters is not always achievable while on the ski lifts. So that's why coverings are going to be mandatory in these settings. So that's been a positive development, and we'll look forward to maybe not having Martin will be right. Maybe we can get extended ski season this spring for people to get back skiing. So next slide, I believe, and I'm turning it over to my colleague, Tony Morzato. Oh, sorry, I've got one more. Indoor recreation may operate in all zones, provided they comply with conditions. And obviously 2 meter distance, 50 per room indoors. And so that, if you recall, people can subdivide facilities into separate rooms. In orange, they can open up with 50 patrons indoors and outdoors. So we've identified the restrictions and the numbers, and those should be consistent if you recall the former framework. In red, 10 patrons indoors, 25 outdoors. Training sessions, sports teams that do not include games and scrimmages or practices may occur. Fitness gyms, 10 only. In the gray, it's closed, with some exceptions for high performance sport athletes who are training for the Olympics and Paralympics, and professional leagues to play and practice. Also for people with disabilities to engage in physical therapy in certain circumstances. So for those of you who are watching the NHL, the fact that Ottawa and Toronto are 2 of the teams that meet that exception requirement for professional leagues to play based upon a plan that was approved by the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Next slide. And that I will turn over to my colleague, Tony Morzato, to take you through the tourism and heritage and cultures components.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Marzotto, Director of Tourism Policy and Research in the Ministry, and I'll be walking through the relevant updates for the tourism, heritage, and cultural sectors. As indicated by the Minister and Steve, over the coming weeks, the local public health unit regions will be classified to the appropriate zone as per the framework. I'll go through some of the highlights of the requirements and the regulations. For specific details of the conditions and requirements, please review the relevant regulations. To start with cinemas. Drive-in cinemas may operate in all zones except shutdown, the zone that we are all in now. Cinemas will be permitted to operate in the green prevent, yellow protect, or orange restrict zone with restrictions. Cinemas must remain closed in regions that are in the red control or gray lockdown zones unless the facility is used for the purposes of rehearsing or performing a recorded or broadcast concert, event, or performance. If the following conditions are met, including no spectators are permitted, every performer or person who provides work must maintain a physical distance of at least 2 meters from every other person, except where necessary for the purposes of the performance or rehearsal, or where necessary for the purposes of health and safety. And if there is a musical performance, singers or players of brass or wind instruments must be separated from other performers by plexiglass or some other impermeable barrier. Right now, in the gray shutdown zone, cinemas must remain closed. And as Steve mentioned, we are going back to the framework that existed before December 26th. Next slide, please. For performing arts facilities, concert venues and theaters must remain closed in regions that are in the red, control, and gray lockdown zones with certain exceptions, including that concert venues and theaters may open if the facility is used for the purpose of rehearsing or performing a recorded or broadcast concert, event, or performance, subject to conditions, the same conditions that I had just talked about for cinemas. No spectators, maintaining physical distancing, and the conditions for performance of musical instruments or singing. In the green prevent, yellow protect, orange restrict, and red control zones, performing arts facilities are permitted to open with conditions. Next slide, please. For drive-in and drive-through venues, these drive-in and drive-through experiences will now be allowed to reopen in all the zones except the current shutdown zone, provided they adhere to conditions and restrictions as outlined in the regulations, including that customers must stay inside the vehicle, except where necessary to purchase admission, food, or beverages, to use the washroom, or otherwise required for reasons of health and safety. Vehicles must be separated by a minimum of 2 meters. Customers must remain in a motor vehicle that is close to the elements. Staff and crew members must observe physical distancing at all times with only limited exemptions, and face coverings in all indoor settings with some exceptions, including while consuming food or drink, or as may be necessary for the purposes of health and safety. For specific requirements and conditions related to food and beverage service, this will depend on the zone that the region is in. Next slide, please. For short-term rentals, in the current gray shutdown zone, short-term rentals are only provided to individuals in need of housing. In the gray lockdown zone, once regions are put into the associated zones, in the gray lockdown zone, short-term rentals, including cabins and cottages, are only permitted for those in need of housing if the rental was reserved after November 22nd. Cabins and cottages in both gray and shutdown zones must close indoor pools, communal steam rooms, saunas or whirlpools, indoor fitness centers, or other indoor recreational facilities that are part of the operation of these businesses. In the green prevent, yellow protect, orange restrict, and red control zones, all short-term rentals, including cabins, cottages, homes, hunting and fishing cabins, resorts, houseboats, condominiums, and B&Bs are permitted to operate. Ice fishing huts may be rented if the hut is used only by members of the same household and it is not used overnight. These requirements do not apply if the person is renting the ice fishing hut for the purpose of exercising an Aboriginal or treaty right. Next slide, please. For hotels and other shared rental accommodations, essentially it's the status quo as they've been allowed to open since and operate since the start of the pandemic. In the red, control, and gray zones, communal steam rooms and saunas on the premises must be closed. In the gray zone, any indoor pools, whirlpools, indoor fitness centers, and other indoor recreational facilities that are part of the operation of these businesses must be closed. Next slide, please. For restaurants, bars, and other food or drink establishment, I mean, the key takeaway, as we've been talking about, is that the restaurants and these other establishments are going back to the framework and the conditions for each of the different zones and colors, coded zones that existed before December 26th. They will be allowed to operate in each of the zones subject to the conditions and rules for that zone. So, for example, indoor and outdoor dining is permitted subject to conditions in the green prevent, yellow protect, orange restrict, and red control zones. This includes, so there are capacity limits for indoor dining, and there are a number of other conditions set out in the regulations, including hours of operation, number of seats at the table, and spacing between tables. And these are consistent with what existed before December 26th for that zone. In the gray lockdown and shutdown zones, takeout, drive-through, and delivery are only permitted, including the sale of alcohol. For nightclubs and strip clubs, they're only permitted to operate if they operate as a food or drink establishment subject to conditions that apply to restaurants, bars, and other food or drink establishments. Next slide, please. For museums, galleries, and heritage. Museums, galleries, aquariums, zoos, science centers, landmarks, historic sites, botanical gardens, and similar attractions are permitted to open in the green prevent, yellow protect, orange restrict, and red control zones with conditions. So some of these conditions include, if the attraction is in the green prevent, yellow protect, or orange restrict zone, the person responsible for the business must ensure that the attraction enables members of the public to maintain a physical distance of at least 2 meters from other persons. If washrooms are made available to the public, they must be cleaned and disinfected as frequently as is necessary. Interactive and high contact exhibits can remain open if located in the green prevent, yellow protect, or orange restrict zone, with frequent cleaning and disinfection as necessary. Some parts of museums and these attractions may be impacted by other sections of the regulations. For example, if they include food and beverage or cafeteria service, and these restrictions and requirements would need to be followed. In the gray lockdown zone, these attractions must be closed to the public, but can be open for drive-in or drive-through access if they meet the conditions that I just covered as part of the drive-in, drive-through conditions. In the gray shutdown zone, all of these attractions remain closed. Next slide, please. For public libraries, libraries in the green prevent, yellow protect, orange restrict, and red control zone can remain open subject to conditions. Library patrons can access circulating materials that are shelved or in other publicly accessible areas of the library. In the gray lockdown zone, so libraries in the shutdown and the gray lockdown zone may open with the following conditions: that circulated material must be reserved over the phone or online. It may only be exchanged with members of the public through contactless drop-off, pickup, or delivery. Circulating materials returning to the library must be disinfected or quarantined for an appropriate period of time before they are recirculated. Patrons may only be permitted to enter the premises to facilitate contactless drop-off and pickup, or to access computers, photocopiers, or similar services, but must not be permitted to be in the book stacks or to handle circulating material that are shelved in our other areas of library storage. In addition, for libraries that offer mental health, addiction, social services, or childcare services, the recording of contact information for members of the public who attend the library is required, including maintaining the records for at least 1 month and disclosing the records to a medical officer of health or an inspector. Next slide, please. All commercial film and television production activities and supporting activities, such as hair, makeup, and wardrobe, are permitted across the province and in all zones, provided the activities are conducted in accordance with the applicable regulations and conditions and other public health requirements. The following restrictions may apply, and these are familiar to people in this sector. No studio audiences may be permitted to be on the film or television set. This is for the gray zone. The set must be configured and operated in a way as to enable persons on the set to maintain a physical distance of at least 2 meters from other persons, except for where necessary for the filming of film or television production. Persons who provide hair and makeup services must wear appropriate personal protective equipment. Singers and players of brass or wind instruments must be separated from any other performers by plexiglass or some other impermeable barrier. Film and television sets are permitted to take place at locations that are otherwise required to be closed to the public under the regulations, and it can be open for purposes of commercial film and television. And sorry, just to clarify, no studio audiences may be permitted to be on the film or television set is a restriction that applies across different zones. And for film and television production businesses located in gray lockdown zones, a COVID-19 safety plan is required. Next slide, please. As indicated by the minister, there are additional sources of funding for tourism, cultural, and sport organizations. I'm going to walk you first through the Community Building Fund. As announced in the November budget, the province is investing $100 million over 2 years to develop a community building fund that supports community tourism, cultural, and sport organizations, which are experiencing significant financial pressures due to the pandemic. These organizations support community engagement, tourism, and recreation through a variety of attractions, experiences, events, and activities. The funding support will be available to not-for-profit organizations and municipalities, and the program will be delivered by the Ontario Trillium Foundation with 2 streams. A first stream will support local community tourism, heritage, and cultural not-for-profits, such as community museums, local theaters, fairs, and cultural institutions, to help sustain their operations in the short term and create new attractions, experiences, and events. And a second stream, funding for municipalities and not-for-profit sport and recreational organizations to make investments in infrastructure rehabilitation and renovation in order to meet public health protocols and local community needs. The Ontario Trillium Foundation has been selected as the program delivery agent, as they are well positioned to deliver this funding to municipal, Indigenous, community, and nonprofit sector. They have strong relationships with sector stakeholders and experiencing delivering these grants on behalf of the government. They also have robust systems in place for processing and evaluating funding applications and for tracking and reporting of results. We're just finalizing details of this fund, and you'll see more information coming soon. Next slide, please. Also announced in the November budget was emergency support for core arts organizations. The government's providing one-time emergency funding of $25 million for Ontario's arts institutions to help cover operating losses incurred as a result of COVID-19. This funding will help these organizations remain solvent and prepare for a time when they can fully reopen their facilities, resume full programming, and welcome back their visitors and audiences. The Ontario Arts Council has been selected as the program delivering agent based on their experience and their history of funding Ontario's core arts organizations. The system has very good systems in place for processing and evaluating funding applications and for tracking and reporting on results. Once again, the program details are being finalized and further details will be available shortly. Next slide, please. Lastly, there are resources available online already. The regulations have not been fully updated yet, but should be in the next day or two. The online COVID-19 response framework and the regulations for areas in stages 3, which includes the green, yellow, and orange zones, in stage 2, which is the red control zone, and stage 1, which is the gray shutdown and gray lockdown zone, include more details and information on requirements and the conditions for reopening. Now I'll turn it back over to the moderator, Derek.
Thank you so much, Tony. I appreciate you walking through some of those very important reopening measures, but also the details on the upcoming Community Building Fund and Core Arts Institution funding that will be coming and being announced very shortly. So please stay tuned for details on that. Moving forward in our presentation, the next presentation comes from Tim Sherman, who is a Assistant Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Finance, to walk us through the Small Business Support Grant, which can provide up to $20,000 of support for eligible businesses who have been impacted by the restrictions and lockdown measures that were put in place by the government. But before we go into Tim's presentation, I will just note that today's presentation is being recorded, as well as it will be sent to you following today's presentation, along with the links to the applicable programs, so that it's handy in your inbox to directly provide you the chance to apply. So if you're not taking notes, or if you need additional reference material available to you, it will be sent to you following today's presentation. Anyways, with that, I will turn it over to Tim to begin his presentation.
Thank you for that. So it's going to provide a kind of a high-level overview of the grant, and hopefully be a helpful scene setter before folks take you through the detail of the portal. So turning to slide 2, government announced the move to a broader province-wide shutdown on December the 21st, and at the same time announced that it would be introducing a new Ontario Small Business Support Grant in recognition of the impact that the shutdown would have on Ontario small businesses. It's worth noting that this new grant is over and above other existing programs that the province has put in place, such as the property tax and energy rebates, or the support that's available to businesses through many federal programs. So the new grant will provide a minimum of $10,000 and up to $20,000 for eligible small businesses that are expected to experience a minimum of a 20% decline in revenue. So every small business will be able to use the support to navigate the challenging times and whatever makes the most sense for them. I think all of you on this call will have a much better sense of some of the ways in which businesses will be able to use this support. And there are 3 basic eligibility requirements in the bottom of the slide, which are probably a helpful framework to use when thinking about eligibility for the program. So first, the business needs to be either closed or significantly restricted by the provincial shutdown. And we have a list of businesses or categories of businesses that meet that eligibility later on in the slide deck. And the portal, of course, and the application will make that clear. Second, this is targeted at small businesses. And so the definition that is being used for this program is common in other contexts. And it's having less than 100 employees. So basically between 0 and 99 employees at the enterprise level. And finally, the business needs to be able to demonstrate that it will experience a minimum of 20% revenue decline as a result of the shutdown. The primary way that this will be measured is by comparing April 2020 with April 2019 monthly revenue. But there are alternate measurements in place for businesses who were maybe established outside this window. And we also have a slide to show you what some of those comparative points will be. And of course, the applications for the new program opened today. So the portal that folks will take you through is now available for applications. Next slide, please. So there's just a couple of examples on this slide, which we thought might be helpful to take folks through so you can kind of understand how those parameters that I just walked through sort of tangibly work their way through the program. So we have kind of 2 companies, Company A, Company B on the bottom of the slide there. But we just assume that both these companies meet the business eligibility test in terms of being shut down or significantly restricted. And if you look at Company A on the left, so you'll see that it says there it'll experience a monthly loss of $20,000, which is equivalent in their context to a 25% decline in revenue. So that means they meet the 20% revenue test, and they will be eligible for a $20,000 grant, which is also the maximum, but it fully offsets the revenue decline that's been presented by the company. And then on the right, there's a monthly loss of $15,000, which is also 20%. So they meet the 20% threshold for the decline, and that entire amount, $15,000, would be funded. So turning to slide 4 to talk a little bit about the revenue comparators. So as I mentioned before, businesses that perhaps were not in operation in April 2019 will still be able to calculate a revenue decline using various alternative revenue decline comparators. And the goal here is to make sure that all small businesses will be able to be eligible to apply for the grant. As you see, the chart on this slide shows the different comparators. So I think one thing you'll notice when you look at the comparators is what the program is trying to capture is 2 points in time, one where the business would have been kind of in normal operations versus when they would have been experiencing some kind of public health restriction. So for example, if you look at the second row in the chart, this is for a small business that went into operation after April 2019, and so as a result couldn't use that more general comparator. Sometime between May 2019 and January 2020, the revenue comparator that they would use is February 2020 and April 2020. And when you think back, February was sort of a pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown, provincial lockdown month, whereas April, the province was in a lockdown scenario, and so as a result, it's meant to be a good representation of the impact that that business would have been experienced in the current provincial shutdown. And then just a note at the bottom of the slide, winter seasonal businesses will also be permitted to apply, and there's an alternative revenue decline comparator of they can choose between December 2019 and December 2020 or January 2020 and December 2020, and that's just a recognition that winter seasonal businesses may have a different rhythm and cadence to their business, and so we're providing some flexibility for those businesses. All right, and then slide 5 provides the list of eligible small business types. So these are ones that are subject to closures or significant restrictions under the current shutdown. As we mentioned, this is sort of the first test that businesses need to meet as part of the application process. And if they meet this plus the revenue test, they will be able to receive a minimum of $10,000 and up to $20,000. For the period of the provincial shutdown, I just wanted to note that this is also the list of businesses that will be eligible for the, excuse me, for the property tax and energy rebate. So I know we're focusing on this program, but it's just another reminder that there are other support programs in place for businesses. So if they don't meet some of the other tests, for example, around revenue for employees, there are these other rebates that they can also apply for. And it's all in the same portal, which makes it much easier for businesses to be able to enter that information. And then the footnote on the bottom there, just to be clear that there are businesses that are not eligible. And those include those that were already required to close prior to the introduction of the modified stage 2 measures in October. So that's kind of the starting point for determining business eligibility. And then of course, any essential businesses that are permitted to operate either within capacity restrictions or otherwise deemed essential are not eligible for the program. And so this is the final slide, and hopefully that gives you a good snapshot of program parameters and eligibility. And I will turn it over to, I guess, folks to take you through the portal itself.
Great, thank you very much, Tim. I appreciate you walking through some of the finer details of the Small Business Support Grant. For those of you who may have joined us, you'll recall before the holidays, we did a similar presentation talking about this program. Now that it has launched and it is currently accepting applications, Tim at least was able to go into greater detail around the eligibility and the level of support that can be required. So certainly encourage everyone who's eligible. With that, the next presentation is going to be from Manish Agrawal, who's with the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. Manish will walk everyone through exactly how to submit an application and all the relevant information that's required to do so. So with that, Manish, I will turn it over to you.
So I heard about this new program and I come to Ontario.ca with a beautiful background. Here, I click on English and I see the link where it says support we are providing for small business. I want to know as a small business, what kind of support I'm getting from the Government of Ontario. I click on this link, which takes me to a page with all details about the different programs that the Government of Ontario is having for in support of small businesses. I see here that there's a new program. I click on it and it takes me to the page where it provides me the list of the programs that are currently available, Ontario Small Business Support Grant, Ontario Main Street Relief Grant, PP support, property tax, energy cost rebates, and what you need to apply. So the program information, what the program is, what I will get as a small business, what are the eligibility criteria, and information about the other programs as well. So I decided to apply for the Ontario Small Business Support Grant because I meet the eligibility criteria. I'll click on apply for funding. Now, when I click for apply for funding, I'm going to show you the test page because I don't want to overwhelm the live system. So it brings me to a page like this. So what you have here is that get help button, which allows me to get help from the contact center or get access to the program information guide. If I want to apply in French, I can switch to French as well. If I've already applied for the other programs, I don't need to start a new application. I can resume the application, or if I've saved the application for draft because I didn't add all the information, I can continue with the same application. Or I can apply for funding. I can start with a new application. So given that I'm a new applicant, I'm going to click on apply for funding. And it brings me to this page where I need to check the eligibility, if I can apply for these programs or not. By default, the new program is selected. I can select multiple programs if I'm interested, or I can just apply for that program. Click on check eligibility, which will again take me to a series of questions to check my eligibility for the program. The first question for the Small Business Support Grant program is, was my business required to close temporarily or significantly restrict services as a result of being subject to province-wide shutdown? I will say yes. Does your business have less than 100 employees? That's the definition for a small business. You can say yes. And is my business expecting at least a 20% revenue decline? I have a handy reference to the business guide that I can access if I want to know more information about what revenue decline means. I'll say yes, and then I click on next. Now, it says that I'm eligible for the following funding program, the Ontario Small Business Grant. I'm going to start my application. Now, when I start my application, it takes me to a series of steps. It's going to ask me to provide my business information, my contact information, information related to the new Ontario Small Business Support Grant, then review all the information I provided in the 3 steps, provide my banking information, and submit. So I come here, I provide my legal name. So I'm running a small business, Olivia's Tea Room, so I provide information. I run it as Store of Happiness. And I provide my CRA business number. Now, at this stage, I can validate the business number if I'm not sure if my business number is correct or not. If it's correct, I don't need to validate it there. If I don't know where to get the business number, I will provide a handy tip. It can be found on the GST, HST return, or the employer payroll, or T2 corporate tax filing. Now, if I'm a self-proprietor who doesn't have a business number, we also provide a handy link on how to obtain a business number from the CRA website. The next step is to provide the address information. I can use address lookup postal code, or if I know the address, I can directly key it in. Okay, so I have that. My billing address is same as head office address. If it is different, I can provide that as well. Click on next. Here I'm going to provide my contact information. Nash, last name is phone number and my email address. Okay, so I've provided the information, I've confirmed my email address is that. It's very important to provide the correct email address, validate it again, because that's the address that is being used in terms of sending emails, confirming the receipt of your application, confirming the payment process, and if you have to come back and resume your application. I'm going to confirm that I'm the owner and I have the signing authority for the individual, trust, or the business. At this point, I can save a draft, which allows me to come back. If I don't have all the information, I can come back and resume the application. All this information will be saved. I don't have to provide that information again. Click on next. Now here I'm going to provide information very specific to the Ontario Small Business Support Grant. Right up front, we provide the application guide, which the users can review, the applicants can review in case they have more questions or they want to find more about the program. I need to provide my business type, and it says restaurants and bars. Now it asks me if my question is part of an enterprise or an affiliated enterprise. We have a handy tip in terms of what it means, enterprise, or they can refer to the application guide for more information. So my business is not part of an enterprise, so I'm not going to check that. Now here, if I was having a winter seasonal business, like a ski resort or any business that is associated with winter seasonal, I can say yes, and it will ask me a series of questions. If my business was in operation in the current business structure in December 2019, if I say yes, it's going to ask me for my highest monthly revenue, either in December 2019 or January 2020, given that many winter seasonal businesses don't start operating until January. For the purposes of this demo, I'll say no, my business is not a winter seasonal business. Then the next question is, was my business in operation in the current business structure in April 2019? If I say yes, it will ask me to provide number of employees, my revenue in April 2019, my revenue in April 2020. If I say no, it prompts me to provide my business first full month of operation, the month, and based on that, it's going to ask me for the same information in terms of number of employees, what was my revenue, and in February 2020, what was my revenue in April 2020. For the purpose of the demo, again, I'll say yes, it was in business structure in operation in April 2019. The number of employees were 10. The revenue was 10,000 in April 2019. In April 2020, the revenue is 2,000. Then I attest that the information I'm providing is all good. I go through the terms and conditions. I agree. I've provided now information with respect to this program. I'll say next. Now here I can review all the information I've provided, the business information, the contact information, sorry, the information related to Ontario Small Business Support Grant. So all the information has been provided. It all looks good. I can go to the next step, which is to provide my banking information. There's a sample check, copy of sample check provided, just in case people want to see where their branch, or what their branch number, institution number, and account number is located on the check. So I'll put that in here. And I'll select the institution number. Now there are many banks. We're just not limiting to the top 5. We cover a broad spectrum of banks within the province. And provides account number. That's it. Then verify that all the information I provided is correct and click on submit. So when I click on submit, again, some terms and conditions. I'll be attesting as Manish Agrawal that all the information I'm providing is true. agree, and submit. So once I do that, my application is submitted, and so it's just a test environment. So it's saying that there's a problem because I've already used the CRA business number. So we have a check as well to ensure that the CRA business number is not used again. There's only one application that can be submitted with that application. But once I click on submit, my application will be submitted, and I'll get a notification saying that your submission, your application has been submitted. Let me quickly share the email with you on how it looks. The business will receive an email similar to this, where it says that you've applied for this program. This is your authorization number, and it's under review. And if it's approved, you will receive a subsequent confirmation email notifying that your payment has been processed. And that it takes around 2 weeks to receive your payment once the application has been approved.
Great. Thank you very much, Manish. I appreciate you walking through the finer points of exactly how to submit an application and all the information that's required. And as I said at the beginning, we certainly encourage everyone to submit their application and take advantage of these supports. That comes to the end of today's formal presentations. But before we depart, let me turn it over back to Minister MacLeod for some closing remarks. Minister, over to you.
Thanks again, Derek, and thanks to the great team at Ministry of Government and Consumer Services, the Ministry of Finance, and of course, my own officials from the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries. These supports are critical at this time. We really are looking for a full economic and social recovery. And so we just want to make sure that you have access to these supports. We'll have more to say on supports coming from our Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries in the days and weeks ahead. So please do keep an eye out for that. And I do wish you all safety as we continue to move through this pandemic. So thanks again, everyone, for taking the time. And I look forward to a continued dialogue with all of you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.